afternoon and welcome. This is the 6th time we're meeting for the SIU Aiu International Conference on Internationalization of Higher Education. You know, ever since the NEP was announced, across the country, there has been a resurgence of hope, optimistic, very, very optimistic hope about changes, reforms that we are looking forward to in the field of higher education in India. We are lucky at SIU that along with the Association of Indian Universities, for the past 6 years, we are working on internationalization. We've been trying through this conference of ours to raise awareness, not just on the concept of internationalization and the concept of internationalization at home, but also on the many, many paths that we can take towards helping nurture global citizenship. So SIU and AIU today are delighted to welcome all of you, though virtually, to our 6th edition of this conference. And this conference focuses on something that has been gaining importance, I think in the past maybe 2 decades. We've been looking at Global North and Global South. We've been talking about the dynamics between collaborations that take place between the Global North and the Global South. We've also been talking in small groups across associations and networks on the need for deeper collaborations, stronger collaborations. In fact, I would say deeper, stronger conversations between universities, and not just universities, but associations, networks, government agencies, departments, partners across regions that can look at collaborations that really, really work, that are win-win for everyone. So this 6th edition talks about interregional cooperation for effective internationalization. And as always, we're kicking off the conference with a roundtable. Today's roundtable looks at what can we learn from networks and associations. Let's hear some of the best practices. Let's hear some of the challenges. And we have an amazing, amazing group of people, experts from across the world, who are going to share their best practices and learnings. But before we go there, let me make a couple of announcements. As always, I am happy to announce the calls for contribution for our 5th edition of our quarterly e-magazine, the Symbiosis Express Intlet, which is on the same theme, interregional cooperation for effective internationalization of higher education. If any of you or anyone that you know who works in this area as a researcher or as a practitioner would be interested in contributing, then please share this information with them. We are looking for articles, we're looking for opinion pieces, we're looking for case studies on this theme. I think the author guidelines and other particulars are in the chat box. So please copy that, or please take a snapshot of that. So this is the 5th edition. We're calling out for contributions to share the word. Those of you who attended the last IHE will also remember that we launched a very unique, very distinctive book. It was called The World Kitchen. Through the pandemic, we had very, very collaborative tasks that students from across the world did when they participated in the Symbiosis e-academies on internationalization. One of the tasks and activities that they did was about learning food, learning cuisine, the history of food, and they actually taught each other cuisine from each country, from their own country. So we're happy to launch the 2nd edition of our annual culinary book, The World Kitchen, and that link is also going to be available in your chat box. You can grab your free copy of this from this link. So like I said, today's roundtable, and those of you who have attended all the IHEs and are joining us once again, know that the IHE always has a roundtable that focuses on something that's really important to maybe preparing us for the conference. We decided that while we're talking about interregional collaborations, it would be important to hear from associations and networks who work in this area. These are networks and associations that have, if I dare say, with the permission of everyone who's here, they have a certain amount of power. They have the power to influence. They have the power to influence not just their member associations or member universities, but they have the power to reach out to everyone, to all the stakeholders that really, really count. I often feel that they have strong agency to help reform the way higher education works and the way higher education grows. I don't know whether that is really the case or not, but we'll hear from some of the best. So today's roundtable focuses on this. In India, when we look at the NEP, we know that reforms are going to be required. We know the change in the way we govern higher education, the way we reach out to students, what we do, how we deliver, how do we ensure quality. These are all aspects that we're going to have to review. We've understood this. We've understood that through collaboration and conversation, we can learn best practices. So associations and networks have played a huge role in higher education, in international higher education. And therefore, we thought that a roundtable made sense. And today's roundtable, very briefly, if I can just mention the names of the persons, you will see that they bring in expertise that not only spans research, scholarship, experience with networks, academic scholarship, they also come from across the world. And therefore, they have their own very distinctive experiences that are going to help us learn. So the chair of the session is Dr. Vidya Yerodekar. She is, as you know, the Pro-Chancellor of Symbiosis International University. We have the President of Obrial Global Observatory, Dr. Ramon Torrent. We have the Secretary General of AIU and our co-host for this university, for this conference, Dr. Pankaj Mittal. We have the Executive Director and CEO of Nafsa, an Association of International Educators, Dr. Esther Brimmer. We have the Associate Director, Knowledge and Research, European Association for International Education, Dr. Laura Rumley. And we have the Dean Faculty of Education, University of Pretoria, and the founder member of ANI, who we at Symbiosis have been very, very strongly inspired by, Professor Chika Sehuli. I'm going to very briefly introduce all of them just so that you understand where they're coming from and what their backgrounds are. And you can keep this in mind while you're listening to them and then post your questions in the chat box. So the chat box is open for everyone. Do post your comments, do post your questions, keep their backgrounds in mind because their backgrounds will help you understand what they're talking about. So the chair for this afternoon's roundtable is Dr. Vidya Yerodekar. It's difficult for me to talk about her as against everybody else because I work so closely with her. Therefore, I'm going to try and tell you just a little bit about her, which again will tell you where she comes from. She is the Pro-Chancellor of our university. She's the Principal Director of the Symbiosis Society. As you know, Symbiosis is a multidisciplinary, multinational, multicultural, international educational institution that not only has 45,000 and more students from all the states of India, but also international students from 85 countries. And according to my research, the only educational institution in India set up primarily for African and Asian students. She holds a postgraduate degree in medicine, a degree in law, and a PhD in internationalization of higher education in India. Her scholarship, therefore, is very strongly in internationalization of higher education. And the third cap that she wears is as executive director at our international office. Numerous research publications, several books. She's also been a member of many, I would say, prestigious and active bodies that have helped frame the structures of internationalization that we have in India. So she's worked as a member of the World Bank, Obrial Global, the UGC under the Ministry of Education, AIU, IBEF under the Ministry of Commerce, the ICCR, FICCI, SEPC, etc. And very briefly, I would say she's very clearly committed to shaping Indian higher education globally through her extensive work in this field. Our members on the panel today also bring an equally illustrious background. Ramon Torrent is the executive president of Obrial Global, an association of universities and association of universities with members in Africa, Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, Europe and the Middle East. L'Oréal Global promotes interregional South-South-North dialogue and cooperation in higher education and related areas. He was active as a student and afterwards as a young lecturer in the process of democratic transition in Spain in the second half of the 60s and the 70s. He was vice rector of the University of Barcelona and the main drafter of its first democratic statutes. He became the director for external relations in the legal service of the EU Council, then retired voluntarily to his position at the University of Barcelona as professor of political economy and international economic law. He's conceived and directed many international projects and published extensively on higher education and international relations. Laura Rumley, PhD, is Associate Director, Knowledge Development and Research for the European Association for International Education based in Amsterdam. She served from 2012 to 2018 as Associate Director and Assistant Professor of the practice at the Boston College Center for International Higher Education, where she is currently a research fellow. She's co-editor of the Journal of Studies in International Education and a member of the advisory board for the European University of the Sea, a European Commission-supported European Universities Initiative. She's co-authored and authored, edited and co-edited several books, book chapters, etc. A former deputy director of the Brussels-based Academic Cooperation Association and a former US Foreign Service officer. We need to talk about this later because this sounds very interesting, Laura. She's a graduate of Georgetown University, the SIT Graduate Institute and Boston College, and she completed her doctoral thesis on internationalization in the universities of Spain. Dr. Pankaj Mittal is the Secretary General of the Association of Indian Universities, and she's only the second woman Secretary General of the association in its long 97 years of existence. She's been serving the higher education sector for more than 3 decades at senior positions and at the University Grants Commission of India. She's the National Commissioner for Rangers of Bharat Scouts and Guides and a member of the General Assembly of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, ICCR, New Delhi. She also served as the first regular Vice Chancellor of the Bhagat Phool Singh Mahila Vishwavidyalaya, Haryana, the first rural women's university of North India for 2 terms. The recipient of many awards and honors like the Fulbright Nehru Scholarship Grant for Education Administrators, the President of India Award in 2017 for digital initiatives in higher education, an honorary D.Litt honoris causa from the Karnataka State Women's University, the first Padma Shri Subhashini Devi Award 2018 for contributions in societal development and community engagement, and many, many, many more awards. She, of course, publishes a number of papers, articles, etc., on issues related to higher education and women empowerment. Dr. Esther Brimmer is the Executive Director and CEO. Welcome, Dr. Esther, once again to IIT, and the CEO of Nafsa, the Association of International Educators. She received her doctorate and master's degrees in international relations from Oxford University and her bachelor's degree from Pomona College. She was the US Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs from 2009 to 2013 and has served on the State Department's policy planning staff. She was the J.B. and Maurice C. Shapiro Professor at George Washington's University's Elliott School of International Affairs, and previously was Deputy Director and Director of Research at the Center for Transatlantic Relations at the Johns Hopkins University's Paul H. Nitze School of Advanced International Studies and a visiting professor at the College of Europe. Published numerous articles and edited numerous works. Her work has also been translated into 5 languages. Professor Chika Sehule is a professor of higher education and the Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Pretoria. He obtained his PhD at the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg. He was a visiting Rockefeller postdoctoral fellow at the Center for European African Studies at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and then was a New Century Fulbright Fellow at the same university. His research interests are in the areas of higher education policy, internationalization of higher education, Higher Education in Africa, and Globalization of Higher Education. He's authored and edited scholarly books on higher education and has more than 40 articles to his name. He has served in several international research projects focusing on higher education and providing expertise from the South African and African perspectives. He was the chairman of the board of the African Network for Internationalization of Education, ANI, and is currently serving on its board. He also currently serves as the chairperson of the Education Deans Forum of South Africa. So this is what we're going to do now. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Vidya, who's the chair. She will speak on the session and the theme, and then she will invite all our speakers to speak. They have approximately 12 minutes to make their presentations or their speeches. We're going to try and keep 15 minutes for question and answers that will come up through the chat box. And then Dr. Vidya will sum up very quickly in about 5 minutes. So that's the flow. Welcome once again to this roundtable. We're delighted to have you at the 6th edition of the SIU AIU Internationalization Conference. Over to you, Dr. Vidya.
Thank you, Anita. And I think you've made my job very easy by introducing all the speakers. So thank you for that. Let me welcome all of you, the speakers, as well as the participants, the audience here. And we see the audience in large numbers for this wonderful conference that all of us are eagerly waiting for every year. For us at Symbiosis, and I'm sure at AIU, this is one conference on internationalization of higher education that we look forward to. And this year, I think the topic of the conference, of course, more of it will be discussed from tomorrow, but is interregional cooperation that leads to effective internationalization. And I think we've seen this all through the pandemic, that how regions, people, universities, organizations need to come together for the betterment of mankind. And over the last several years, annually, when we were discussing internationalization, we realized that more and more that it's not just universities and people from universities and higher education institutions that need to collaborate, but it's high time that regions and nations from those regions also need to collaborate and cooperate so that our students and faculty members get benefited. And therefore, we decided that the theme of the conference should be interregional. Here, I think on a public platform, I must thank Obrial Global, specifically Professor Raman and Nicholas, for giving me the opportunity to chair the Obrial Global India chapter. And I say this because that's when I found the importance of interregional cooperation. I mean, when we look at dialogues between South-South and South-South-North, you wonder there are so many things that are in common amongst us that we need to really talk about and really need to be in conversation about. And later, of course, with my interactions with Dr. Pankaj Mittal, who is equally passionate about internationalization as I am, and of course, our dear friend Esther Brimmer, who's here once again. You remember, Esther, in 2017, when you were here, we discussed about setting up of an Indian network for international education. In fact, the then education minister, who was a chief guest, mentioned to us that don't do it at your university level, but do it at a national level. And it was what a pleasant coincidence that you met Dr. Pankaj Mittal in one of the other conferences and you endorsed the same once again. And then she took it up and we kept interacting with each other, back and forth proposals between AIU and SIU. And finally, today we see the Indian Network for Internationalization of Higher Education, which also brings us back to the importance of networks. And I, for one, believe that, while universities, countries, nations making policies on higher education is important, but networks in those countries or regions are and become very dominant. Just take examples of representations that are here. Nafsa. Nafsa has been playing such a major role, and I used to participate in Nafsa several years ago on behalf of course, the Symbiosis International University. But now the network of Nafsa has not just grown to the United States or within the United States, but definitely has members from all across the world, which also means that people and universities from all across the world get to share best practices of what is happening in universities in the United States, and of course, vice versa. Likewise, the African Network for International Education, My dear friend Joey, who represents it, and I'm glad Chika is here on his behalf today, is again a very important network. And again, it takes back to one of my other friends and mentor, Jane Knight, who defined internationalization of higher education and who is equally important in establishing the African Network for International Education. And since the time I started studying about ANI or ANI or whatever you call it, the African Network, I always thought that why shouldn't India have an Indian network for internationalization of higher education? And that's where we are today. The EAIE, which Laura represents, of course, has been one of the oldest networks in Europe, and Obrial Global, another network in Europe, born or established in the University of Barcelona, and now separated out into an independent network. So you see networks not just in Europe, in US, and Africa, but you see several such networks in Australia, in the whole of Asia. There are so many Asian networks, and also in Japan and other countries. What is the importance of these networks really? It's not just about getting people together in these networks. It is not just about getting colleges and university representatives in these networks, but it is all about even driving policies of those countries. And I'm sure with the Indian Network for Internationalization of Higher Education, we will also be a part of the policy making, at least of internationalization of higher education here in India. So there's so much to learn from networks across the world. So that we learn as the Indian higher education system, which of course with the national education policy has now really reached a milestone where we see a whole transformation of the Indian higher education system. And whereas the higher education system is one of the largest in the world, we haven't done much in of course the internationalization space. And I'm sure with this new network that we have established here in India, which Pankaj will speak about in details, I'm sure we are going to see a sea change in the process of internationalization. We will be helping other smaller institutions or institutions, not just across India, but tomorrow in the session, we will also talk about how India can play a dominant role through this network in its neighborhood. Likewise, we will learn best practices from all of you who are representing here, and so many other networks that are not represented here, but we are in dialogues with. So I won't take much time. I would like to listen to you all. I would, of course, like people to ask you questions. And this is a session of great learning. And I'm sure, each one of the audience members who are present here are going to, get something out of this session. So let me first invite the senior most academic leader and my mentor and dear friend, Professor Raman. Anita has already introduced him, so I will not, but he's the president of the Obrial Global Observatory and has done immense work in bringing the South-South-North collaboration. So Professor Raman, over to you.
Now, good afternoon, good morning. In order to keep within the allocated time, I will go directly to the point. I will develop 3 arguments in favor of interregional dialogue and cooperation between geographically determined associations of universities. The first argument will be rather quantitative, the second will be rather qualitative, and the third will be in terms of international relations. The first argument goes as follows. There are hundreds and hundreds of international agreements between governments in the area of education, including higher education. And there are thousands and thousands of agreements and memorandums of understanding signed between specific universities and institutions of higher education. However, this doesn't solve the problem of articulating in the best possible manner international relations in this area. Most of these agreements and memoranda of understanding remain empty and without being applied. Many of them overlap and do not cover important areas in higher education policy. But more importantly, we tend to forget that when we signed a bilateral or a plurilateral agreement between a group of institutions, we exclude all the others. We always think on who is included, and we never think about how many are excluded from this framework of cooperation. This very crowded landscape of international agreements does not guarantee synergies, does not guarantee cooperation, and in many cases, it provokes competition. Many of these agreements are meant to compete the ones with the others. If you look at them from the perspective of what I know better, European universities, for example, they compete on who has the best agreement with other universities in the world, and the best agreement, let's be clear, to attract talent, which means the best agreement to provoke brain drain from countries that are not in Europe. This is the facts, hard facts, that very often are forgotten in the literature, but this is, at least in my opinion, the situation. So when you look at this crowded landscape, interregional cooperation between associations of universities, between the associations of universities in Latin America and the Association of Indian Universities, or between the Association of Indian Universities and the ASEAN University Network, or the Association of Indian Universities with the Association of African Universities, there you find an instrument of articulation of international relations in higher education. This is the first argument, bringing within some common useful framework this myriad of international agreements between governments and between universities. The second argument, as I said, is more qualitative. We like and we should look for equality and lack of exclusivity in international relations. But it's very difficult to find equality in dealings with universities. How small universities, not to say in India, let's say in Bangladesh or in Burundi, in Africa, can get into an equal framework of collaboration with the big universities in the Western Europe or in the United States. It is absolutely impossible. Bilateral relations between universities are under the sign of inequality. If we look to relationships between equals, here again, regional organizations can be considered equal because regional organizations exist. In Europe, there is the European University Association. In Africa, there is the Association of African Universities, and also regional organizations of universities in Eastern or Southern Africa. In Latin America and the Caribbean, you have national associations, but brought together now into a framework of cooperation for Latin America and the Caribbean. As I mentioned before, the ASEAN University Network is there, and the two most populated, and because of this, more important countries in the world, that is to say China and India, for these purposes, can be considered because of their population and because of their complexity as a region. So the Association of Indian Universities can meaningfully deal representing universities in a country of 1,300 million people with the Association of African Universities, which brings together the universities of a continent with approximately the same population, that is to say, 1,300 million people. So here we have a second argument in favor of international dialogue and cooperation between regional and national associations of universities. The third argument is more political. In the last 3 or 4 years, I must confess that I have become very worried with the abuse of the term global. We have it even in Obreal Global. This is the name of our association. However, in this case, global is not worrying because it means that we bring together people from different countries in the world. So we are, in that sense, worldly or global. But the globe is not a political act. We cannot base or found international relations in the basis of the globe, because the globe, the planet Earth, is, as I said, not a political act. Political actor remains countries. Countries are different. So any excessive appeal to global, in fact, uncovers the hegemonic position of some countries in front of the other. The globe as an integrated political entity does not exist. So if the world does not exist and there are very different countries, one's much more powerful than the other, then a way of bringing some sense of equality to these international relations is through regions. To use an example I also used before, small countries in Africa cannot meaningfully deal with big countries in Europe or even with big countries like India or China. But brought together, African countries can meaningfully talk in equal terms with Europe or with India or with China or with Latin America. This argument applies also, and allow me that as I'm the oldest here, I can also be the more critical to expressions that have become now fashionable, but that uncover the same difficulty. The global South, sorry, does not exist. What exists are different Souths in plural. We have Africa, we have Latin America, we have India, we have Southeast Asia. This is not one global South. These are different regions in the South. And this is the reason why, as Dr. Vidia has mentioned, from Obreal Global, we promote South, South, North, or I would even say South, South, North, North, interregional cooperation, because there are different regions in the South, different regions in the North, and we have to address and give legitimacy to all these regions. So this is the third argument in favor of interregional cooperation between geographically determined association of universities. In this context, and this will be my last minute, in this context, associations like Obreal Global cannot intend to be actors. Actors must be the regional and the big national associations of universities. We can only be facilitators, go-betweens, intermediaries, allowing these regional actors to really take the lead. This is why we were so proud, and this will be my last sentence, to become associated to the adventure of the setting up of the Indian Network for Internationalization of Education under the leadership as an association of universities of the Association of Indian Universities and as an individual university of Symbiosis International University. Be associated to this endeavor has greatly honored us and makes us feel confident that by promoting interregional dialogue between geographically determined association of universities, we are in the good path. Thanks very much for allowing me to share these words with you. That will be all for me in this phase of our session. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Raman. And you really brought forth very important views and arguments in your own words. And you so rightly said that, you know, the memorandum of associations or understandings or agreements between universities most of the times remain unexecuted. And even if they are, they lead to more competition than really cooperation, and thereby the importance of associations and networks. From here, we move on to Dr. Pankaj Mittal, who is the Secretary General of the Association of Indian Universities. And I request you, Pankaj, to speak about the new Indian Network for International Education.
Okay, thank you, Vidyaji. And also thanks for hosting the 6th conference in collaboration with AIU. We have been working together for the last 6 years, where we have been holding this international conference. So a very good afternoon to all of you. And it's very nice to see Esther, Laura, with whom we had just met a few days back in some of the conferences. And of course, Vidya is always there and Raman is there. So thank you very much. So what I'll start with is that we know that internationalization of higher education is important. Nobody can deny the importance of internationalization of higher education. And in India, when this new education policy came in 2020, a lot of emphasis was given to internationalization of higher education. So much so that the establishment of campuses of foreign universities in India, which was pending for a very, very long time, the national education policy mentioned that yes, now Indian universities can, foreign universities can come to India and establish their campuses in Indian soil, but only the top 100 universities in the world ranking. So that is already there. The regulations are in making, and very soon the foreign universities will be in India. Similarly, Indian universities can go abroad and set up their campuses. And then again, one very important thing, which was joint degrees and dual degrees, which again, we were thinking that how Indian universities can give joint degrees in collaboration with the foreign universities. That has also been cleared by the national education policy. And now the joint degrees can be given. In fact, yesterday only the University Grants Commission has come out with a regulation with regard to dual degree, that how 2 degrees can be given simultaneously during the same period, whether in physical, online, or a blended mode. So that is also there. And then obviously international offices in Indian universities and transfer of credits. So all this has been given in the national education policy just to ensure that internationalization is promoted on Indian campuses in a big way, because so far, as you all know, that if we count in terms of the international students on Indian campuses, it is not more than 50,000, whereas something like 1 million students go out of country every year to study in universities outside India. And in the process, they spend something like the entire budget of Indian higher education. I mean, whatever the government is spending on the Indian higher education for 1 year, that money is spent, equal amount of money is spent by our students who are going abroad for studying in international universities. So we need to promote internationalization, and we want that India should be a hub for affordable quality higher education. So we are wanting to promote India as a hub for affordable quality higher education. So for that, what we are doing at AIU, of course, these are the national education policy initiatives which will take shape very soon. But what we are doing at AIU is one that in AIU, we are vested with the responsibility of giving equivalence of foreign degrees with the Indian degrees. So many scholars come to India, whether from foreign university. I mean, they've studied in foreign universities. So when they come to India for equivalence, we do that equivalence. And so far we have been doing it on the basis of the duration of the degree, amongst other things. But now we are shifting to the credit approach. And now the credits will be matched, but of course, credit mapping will be done. And we are working on the exercise of credit mapping. Similarly, we also realized that many of the universities who want to have collaborations, because collaborations we are talking of in a big way. So many of the universities, when they come to India for collaborations and they want to know that which Indian university to collaborate with in a particular subject area, they are not able to know, because we have overall, say, Indian ranking is also there, NIRF, we call it National Institute of Ranking Framework. We also have NAC, National Assessment and Accreditation Council, which is giving the overall rating of the university. But in a specific area, we are not able to know that with which university a foreign university can collaborate. So we are building a portal called Aiu Collaboration Portal, in which every university is supposed to give their best areas, best facilities, publications, so that when an Indian university wants to collaborate, they go to Aiu portal, say, if you want to collaborate in quantum physics, and if you write quantum physics on the Aiu portal, down will come the list of the Indian universities who are good in quantum physics, along with their credentials in terms of publications, facilities, books, journals, everything. So that type of activity we have taken up. Now, the Indian network of international higher educators, which we are trying to establish, again, thanks to Vidyaji. And as she told that when we spoke to Esther Brimmer around 2 years back, unfortunately, after that, for 2 years, COVID stuck, so we got a bit delayed. But there we felt that, like Nafsa, there should be a network for Indian international educators, because till date, I mean, India is such a large country, such a diverse country. We have something like 1,000 universities and 38 million students are studying in our universities and colleges. But so far, we do not have a network of our own. So it was decided then and there that we should be having an Indian network of international higher educators. And then the Vidya came as a big support. So we made a concept paper and we have done many things in that. And now the Governing Council of AIU has approved the establishment of INHI, we call it in short, Indian Network of International Higher Educators. And right now we have sent a letter to all the universities, firstly in India, which are good on the NIRF ranking and which have some international footprint in their campuses in terms of international students. So we have already written to them seeking their acceptance to be a part of the network. And what will this network do? What we are wanting to do is that, as I told you, that in India, we are diverse. We have many good universities. We have not so good universities. We have border area universities. We have rural area universities. So there are some universities who are very good in internationalization, but there are many universities who are not good in internationalization. And out of these many universities, there are many who want to do internationalization, but they don't know how to do it, whom to approach, whom to collaborate, whom to talk to with. So therefore, we are wanting that we should be working as a network in which everybody will be helping each other. So the good ones will be mentoring the universities which are not so good. There'll be a lot of hand-holding. There'll be sharing of experiences. There'll be sharing of knowledge. And so that all of them, like that Ubuntu concept of Africa, that all of them move together, all of them progress together, all of them do internationalization together. So this will be a network in which we will be helping the universities. And as you know, Association of Indian Universities is the biggest association in the world, with something like 885 universities as the members from one country only. I mean, there are IAU is there, which is not having more than, I think, 500 to 600 universities are the members, that too from multiple countries. ACU is again having 500 to 600 as their members. But AIU is the biggest association of universities with 885 universities as the members from a single university. Of course, there are 15, 16 universities from the foreign countries. So what we want that this big network should get bigger in terms of having international regional cooperation, as Aubriel has already very kindly offered that they would like to be a part of this network. Thank you. Thanks for the offer, Raman. And we are wanting that this network should flourish, and internationalization of higher education in India should flourish. That is why we are building this network. So let us see how it comes up. We are trying our best, and let us see how far we get into this. And I'm sure we will, because we have very good support for our network. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. I'm sure this network is going to see the light of the day very soon. And we have all our friends from here who will help us to build it as one of the strongest networks here, not just for Indian universities, but I would say, in this neighborhood. So we have great plans and we'll take this ahead. We are very happy also because of the national education policy that was rolled out and has really brought in internationalization to the forefront. Nevertheless, let's move on to another friend of ours, Esther Brimmer, who is the president of executive director and CEO of Nafsa, another very large association of international educators. And there are a lot of things that we need to learn from you, Esther, and from Nafsa. So we'll be happy if you can guide us in this journey of us setting up a network in India.
Good afternoon and greetings to everyone. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here. Indeed, on behalf of Nafsa, I'm delighted to celebrate the creation of the Indian Network for International Education. This is quite a milestone in the history of international education. So congratulations, and we are thrilled to see this creation and to work with you now and in the future. Indeed, we had the opportunity to talk back in 2017, and again, even in my last in-person meeting in January 2020, when I was also passed through India on these issues. So it's wonderful to see the fruition of this work, and we wish you well in it. Today, I'll talk a bit about some of the different types of work that different associations do, and why I think the work of associations remains absolutely relevant to the needs of international education, especially in our expanding knowledge-based economy. Now, I'll take a moment, and as you all know Nafsa well, but I will just note that in our revised strategic plan, we talk about 3 areas we work on as an association. Our mission to educate, advocate, and innovate. Of course, as an association, we provide professional education to our members as part of knowledge building for the field of international education. And as you know, our professional development courses support educators at every stage of their careers, and actually now are all available online. I would suggest in particular that we're finding that in this age, that not only should we provide information to our members, but we have to talk about why that information is significant. We're all flooded by information, but one of the things associations can do is help our members understand what is significant, which trends really matter, how we advance the field at this point. So for example, in our publications, we try to apply scholarship to enhance practice. Another area we work in is we advocate. Now, we advocate for US policies that support international education and a welcoming approach to international students who come to study with us. Indeed, Nafsa has urged the Biden administration to build on the July 26, 21 joint statement by the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Education to develop a more detailed international education strategy. And we're advocating for an increase in the number and diversity of international students in US higher education institutions, and the increase in the number and diversity of American students studying abroad in more places. And we are encouraging global higher education institutional partnerships that will facilitate internationalized curricula, foreign language instruction, collaborative research, and faculty mobility. And we must say, it's of course auspicious we're meeting this week. We are heartened to see that higher education is even part of current diplomacy between the US and India. Just 2 days ago, on April 12th, there was a US-India higher education discussion where the US Secretary of State and the Indian External Affairs Minister announced a working group on education and skill training, which will bring academic institutions in the United States and India together to develop new joint research programs. This group will also focus on creating more opportunities for universities to partner on exchange programs. And at Nafsa, we continue to innovate, the 3rd pillar of our strategic plan. We have created an international membership category for educational professionals based outside the United States to facilitate engagement with colleagues around the world. And furthermore, this year we will offer our annual conference in 2 parts, a virtual component on May 4th and 5th, and an in-person component in Denver Colorado, May 31st to June 3rd, recognizing that the ability to bring ourselves together in this space is so important. And one of the things we'll continue to use, of course, is this virtual space. Now, NAFSA's 2022 annual conference will feature all the hallmarks that international educators, exhibitors, and the public sector have come to rely on for this annual event, but is further enhanced by the virtual programming that offers participants greater content, access, and flexibility. Since we're all trying to seize this moment of our collective progress towards recovery from the challenges of the past 2 years, and talk about how we together can emerge as a profession stronger and more prepared for the future. And we believe that global education is crucial to addressing the challenges of the 21st century. Moreover, advances in information technology and robotics demonstrate that our complex economic systems are increasingly knowledge-based. Students are eager to gain the knowledge they will need now and the knowledge acquisition skills that will carry them forward in the future. Now, some students will have a chance to study in another country, but even those who cannot travel, which is the majority of all of our students, benefit from meeting international students in their classroom. Now, of course, international education has helped inform great changes for decades. 60 years ago, 70 years ago, it was the agricultural experts leading the Green Revolution. Now it's the information revolution. Countries around the world recognize the importance of new higher education policies to building that future. Indeed, India's national education policy is an example. There is a strong economic argument for internationalization of higher education, which will take many forms in different regions of the world. Students and scholars, of course, benefit from stimulating interactions from professors and colleagues around the world, and institutions benefit from partnerships that bolster their resources and reach. But I suggest that there is an even more fundamental purpose, and that is to help advance human dignity and well-being. Some of the most exciting work we're seeing is the intersection between international education and the discussions of greater inclusion and equity. And international education is a long-term investment in a peaceful, more equitable, more globally connected world. It pays dividends over a lifetime. For decades, international education has made a great contribution to our cooperation in international relations. People-to-people contexts build understanding and remain important. Through open academic exchanges, we have helped millions forge connections, gain new experiences, and expand horizons. The vibrant exchange of people and ideas has helped modernize curricula and develop a spirit of cooperation. Now, we appreciate that the pace and type of internationalization will vary in different regions. But we also suggest that, again, there's a role for associations. We provide a framework for our members to exchange ideas, and we do so in different ways. As you know, at NAFSA, we have our knowledge communities. We also have our member interest groups, which cover over 30 different topics. Of course, there's a member interest group focused on India. But associations are also playing an important role as we grapple with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Associations were vital sources of information for decision makers on campuses and companies as they sought to help students, scholars, and employees during the crisis. Indeed, we set up an information page just for that was free to everyone, member or not, during the beginnings of the pandemic crisis, again, to try to help get information out. One of the other ways we share information is via our publications. As you know, NAFSA publishes its member magazine, International Educator. I'm delighted to tell you that the April issue being published this week happens to feature India, with articles about higher education reforms in India, as well as a piece on ways for international officers to better support the over 167,000 Indian students in the United States. Our organizations will continue to seek ways to deliver international education, and many students and scholars will benefit from enhanced alliances, partnerships, and other relationships. And from the increase of strategic international partnerships to joint degrees, to team teaching among professors in different countries, We are seeing many innovative developments in the last several years, and we think these benefit students, faculty, administrators, and their institutions. They also help deepen the global networks that we are talking about. We see strategic partnerships as valuable components of successful higher education internationalization. In Nafsa's book, Nafsa's Guide to International Partnerships, describes how successful partnerships are multi-level relationships, which can include research collaboration, virtual exchange, community engagement, internationalization is home, as well as education mobility. So in conclusion, I would suggest now more than ever, networks and knowledge are essential for success. Striving to advance international education is an expression of hope in the future. We endeavor to bring international education to more people so they can build better lives despite the challenges they face. I suggest that our mission is just as vital now as when Nafsa was founded 74 years ago. Then, decades ago, people in many places were struggling to build a new world after the Second World War. Now we face the pandemic, violent conflict, the rise of authoritarianism and nationalism, and climate change. We must share ideas, research, and reason to chart a way forward. Educators must be realistic, but ultimately optimistic too. What we do and how we do it will vary in each country and region, but our efforts are linked by a commitment to enhancing education and sharing knowledge. Nafsa is proud to partner with prestigious global, international, and regional associations and networks. And therefore, again, I'd like to say in conclusion that we are, again, celebrate the creation of the Indian Network for International Education. We think that we're all together will be working on creating powerful communities of learning, and we look forward to working together now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther, for a very, very elaborative, discourse. And we of course knew everything about Nafsa, but you put it so well. And I like the words of, your motto of educate, advocate, and innovate. And there is a lot of advocacy that you all do in the US in policy making, and there's so much that we can learn. I think there is a question on this in the chat box, which I will take it later. I also like your statement when you said that, internationalization of education is a long-term investment and that pays dividends later. So it's so very true. And we're realizing this in India, and I'm sure, it will pay dividends here back home to our educational institutions as well. We now move forward to Europe, and we have Laura, Dr. Laura Rumley, who's the Associate Director, Knowledge and Research, EAIE. We all know about the European Association for International Educators, and which has been in existence for a long, long time. We also know how well European universities collaborate with each other through the Erasmus scheme. But we would like to know more about how EAIE actually brings in or supports this collaboration, and how does it support higher education institutions in Europe and of course outside Europe as well. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Professor Vidya. To you, to my distinguished fellow panelists, and to the many colleagues joining the session from the Symbiosis University community across India and around the world, it's a real honor for me to be a part of this conversation on behalf of the EAE. And by the way, I do send very warm greetings from our president, Michelle Stewart, and executive director, Leonard Engel, who I know both wish they could have been here. They're actually actively involved in a board meeting today, so working on the business of our association as we speak right now. It's really quite a privilege to witness the birth of any new national network dedicated to the advancement of international education, but I'd say that it's particularly true, for me anyway, in relation to India. This is a country with such a vast higher education system, as we've heard, such a massive youth population, and as we've already heard, so many interesting and ambitious aspirations for the sector in the coming years. It's also always a delight to return, even if virtually, to Symbiosis International University, given its special profile in relation to internationalization and its commitment to bringing together perspectives from all corners of the world to think about why we do the things that we do in the field of international education and how we can do them better. And I always learn so much from these conversations. There is, of course, a lot to learn about how networks and associations in international education do their work, and how their identities and their motivations and their approaches to that work can evolve over time. As we look out across the globe and see how our colleagues are thinking about these various issues, there's a great deal that we can learn from one another. So in that spirit, I wanted to bring forward a short series of rather practical, almost operational, and quite personal reflections about what the EAE has learned during its 32 years of experience as an association. 32 years is considerably younger than Nafsa, of course, as well as other sister organizations such as the Institute of International Education, IIE, also in the US, or DAAD in Germany, for example. But now moving into its fourth decade, I think it's fair to say that the EAE is acquiring a level of organizational maturity that allows those of us who are interested in these things to think more critically and based on a body of experience about our strengths as an association, as well as new challenges and new opportunities ahead. And why is that important? Esther has already alluded to this, but I agree fully and wholeheartedly that associations have a critical role in defining issues, in developing solutions, and in amplifying the voices of our members and disseminating the messages our sector feels are so critically important to share with the societies we serve, whether nationally, regionally, or more broadly. Collective action is vital in addressing so many of the key changes we face today. And despite some very serious challenges facing international collaboration at the moment, and I'm thinking here very specifically about the geopolitical tensions we see playing out around the world, and of course, very close to the EAE here in Europe with the situation in Ukraine, I think the future remains decidedly networked. And in that context, I think associations are more vital than ever today, and therefore their health and vitality is important, I would argue. So my comments are specifically going to focus on a couple of ideas about the health and vitality of associations by drawing on some reflections I have about the one that I currently represent, which is the EAE. What I'm about to share here, I see as food for thought in this wide-ranging, globally engaged conversation we're having, and I hope it adds something of value to the collective set of ideas we're surfacing here as we learn together. It was a bit hard to know where to start with this set of reflections, but I ended up landing in my head on 4 lessons learned, if you will, that speak to me personally, but that I thought might also be interesting to this group. I'd be interested in getting reactions from the audience and my fellow panelists. So each of these 4 reflections has a bit of a yin and a yang construction to it, as you'll see. And the first has to do with the notion of staying true to a unique or a particular identity, while also embracing a given association's place in a wider global context. So the EAE, for example, is a European association, of course, but what does that really mean? The original founders of the group were working in Europe and were responding to developments in the European higher education context. Our office, our secretariat, is physically located in Europe, and the vast number of our current members live and work principally in Europe. So geography is a defining factor. But the political dynamics and policy frameworks of the region are also defining factors. Think of the European Commission's interests, as you've already alluded to, Dr. Vidya, to the internationalization of higher education and the collaboration between institutions across our particular region. We could also point to a set of shared values that have been articulated at different points that offer a common frame of reference for what has been referred to at the EU level anyway as the European way of life. But we don't operate in a vacuum. Our region interacts also with the rest of the world. Our members and our institutions do the same. We look out across the global landscape and delight in watching and learning from what's happening elsewhere. What Nafsa is doing in the US and with its own global engagement. What AISA is doing in South Africa and ANI more broadly in Africa. What FAUBI is doing in Brazil and IEA is doing in Australia, and so on. So as a European association, our responsibility is to understand what our members and core audiences need from us to do their best work in the context of Europe and as Europeans, but with good insights into how that work and how the EAE fits into a wider context and can be enriched by that wider context. It's an interesting balancing act, but an important one for associations with a strong regional identity like the EAE to constantly attend to. And as the Indian network charts its course, it will be interesting to see how its distinct national character shines through, but also how it engages with the wider international education community around the world. The second idea I wanted to reflect on with you has to do with respecting the value of our intuition, but also committing to move beyond assumptions. With every passing year, I think the EA has become increasingly better at mapping a course for itself that's really built on a critical interrogation of new challenges and opportunities, and whether the status quo still makes sense or not. More and more systematically, we've been asking ourselves these absolutely key questions, such as why? Why should we take a particular action or offer a particular kind of event or service? Why should it be the EAE filling a particular gap and not some other organization? Why now? And other important questions like, how do we know? How do we know our members need or want this thing? How do we know if what we tried worked or not? In what ways did it work or not? And for whom did it work or not? These types of things. We're getting better about moving beyond assumptions in a number of different ways, but I think all of this can be largely boiled down to two things: committing to a strategic approach to our work. We are guided today by our strategy 2026 that helps us puzzle through choices and reflect in organized ways on our options, and developing and really leveraging our ability to use data to drive our decision-making. Now, strategic planning, thinking, and action, and data-driven decision-making is not news to anyone here, nor is it rocket science, but it's not easy work either. I'm in no way saying we do it flawlessly, far from it, but I would say the culture of the EA is moving ever more purposefully toward much more consistent, evidence-based decision-making than it has in the past. I think that shows nice evolution on our part, a lesson learned, and is also reflective of a broader move to critically question and advance internationalization on the basis of evidence, not just intuition or assumptions. The third detail I want to quickly highlight in this conversation builds a bit on the second one. I think a striking aspect in the evolution of the EAE is the way it has worked to embrace growth and professional approaches to association management, while focusing on maintaining the personal touch and the heartfelt aspects of the EAE experience. Just as I know is the case with Nafsa and other international education associations, many EAE members feel a very strong attachment to their community of peers within the association. We are a very people-friendly community where annual conferences are almost like family reunions. So what happens when your family grows from 600 or 1,000 people to 6,000 or 10,000 participants? You have to have business processes in place to manage those effectively. Now, business processes can bring efficiency, and large events can bring tangible benefits that come with economies of scale, but they can also have a dampening effect on the sense of personal engagement and belonging that participants as individuals may have with the association and with the field. I don't know if the EAE is meeting that need for a sense of belonging for everyone who seeks that, but what I can say is that attending to that need is a priority. We're constantly working to gauge that situation and respond to it. And ultimately, the EAE strives to inspire members, to empower them, inform them, and celebrate them. And ultimately, that calls for a mix of real professionalism and real heart. The fourth and final reflection I wanted to share with you has to do with the need for associations like the EAE to balance continuity from year to year alongside active cultivation of new leadership and new voices to ensure a bright future for the association. There are many different ways to structure associations and to invite involvement of volunteers and elected officers. We have a particular way of doing that. Nafsa, Ani, the new network in India, and others will have their own ways of doing that. I think my main message here is that my experience of associations is that they're only as strong as their governance structures are rational and manageable. These structures need to be authentic and meaningful to the organizations that have to live with them. And just as we want to think about cultivating talent among the early career individuals within our institutions and the career trajectories within the field of international education more broadly, each association has to ensure that there are mechanisms for new generations of talented individuals to be drawn into key leadership roles over time. For those of us in such roles now, that requires an openness to change and enthusiasm for planning for a future when we will not be in the positions of authority that we currently hold. So to conclude, authenticity, rigor, professionalism, heart, and an openness to change and to new blood. These to me are some of the key characteristics of a vibrant international education association or network. Nobody is doing it all perfectly, but I think by sharing our experiences and perspectives, our associations have a much better chance of rising to the very exciting challenges and opportunities we're all facing around the world today. I and the EAE very much look forward to watching INHI's evolution, cheering it on, and collaborating in solidarity around issues of mutual interest. Thank you again for letting the EAE be part of this conversation, and please accept our warmest congratulations on the launch of the new Indian network. I'll pass back to you now, Dr. Anita.
Thank you, Laura. You were absolutely crisp. And I think, all the 5 points that you have made a mention of, the way EAI functions, there's so much of learning for us at INI. And I'm sure we are going to imbibe these, wonderful statements that you made of professionalism, of openness to change, of authenticity. So, while you are, EAI is a European association, how does it still maintain its global presence or global image? So there is a great learning from your talk. Thank you so much. We move on to someone closer to the south, Professor Chika, who's the Dean of Faculty of Education, University of Pretoria, and a founder member of the African Association of International Education. This is another association that we are kind of looking at as our big brother, because we feel they've evolved exactly the way we are going to evolve from now on, that we've launched the INI. So please convey our best wishes to Jovi as well, and we look forward to Professor Chika, who will address us now.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to address you. And let me thank you for inviting us as ANI to be part of this important milestone in the history of higher education in India. My introductory comments will provide a background to the establishment of ANI. Why ANI? ANI was established to be a voice for the international dimension of higher education in Africa. It has, at the time, we identified a gap in terms of knowledge production in the field of the internationalization of higher education. And then through collaboration with other international scholars, we established this particular organization in order to conduct research in the field of international higher education with particular focus on Africa. Why that particular focus? We were weary of being research objects with people who would come to Africa to collect information about us and thereafter go and write about us and send us, that information back to be consumers of our own history that has been constructed by other people outside of the continent of Africa. And we argued at the time that a time has come for African scholars, especially young scholars, who were interested in the international dimension of higher education, to come together, to collaborate in terms of the development of research in this particular field. And we need to write about our own experiences in Africa, in higher education, and produce knowledge so that people can be able to understand what is happening in terms of the international dimension of higher education in Africa from an African perspective. I need to indicate the fact that there are other continental organizations like the Association of African Universities that brings together universities on the continent. There are also regional associations like Inter-University Council of East Africa. In the Southern African region, we've got the Southern African University Association, SARUA, that is organizing universities in the southern part of Africa. But as ANI, we are not competing with those particular organizations, and we are not as bureaucratic as they are. We are bringing individual researchers, individual scholars who are interested in the field of international higher education. Our vision and mission therefore finds expression in the following statement that we aimed at developing and strengthening the capacity for research, advocacy, and professional development in the international dimension of higher education to meet the needs of individuals, institutions, and organizations in Africa. And I need to highlight the fact that I think the strength of ANI has been around meeting the needs of individuals as well as institutions in Africa as far as the international dimension of higher education is concerned. And we also aimed at contributing to the development and understanding of internationalization of higher education in Africa through high impact research projects and publications. And we aimed at informing policy decisions related to the international dimension of higher education with high quality research evidence, and lastly, to build and strengthen and sustain Africa's research capacity on internationalization of higher education. From those aims, as well as the vision and the mission of this particular organization, you will see that there is particular emphasis on research, on knowledge production, because that is what we felt at the time was needed. And as I indicated, in terms of membership, we are not drawing membership from institutions, but mainly from individuals who are located in higher education institutions. And the emphasis, and this might be regarded as one of the major contributions of ANI, which is capacity development of young scholars and researchers who are located in those particular institutions, but they have an interest on the international dimension of higher education. And by focusing on capacity building and knowledge production, we were in a way also contributing to the strengthening of those organizations and institutions where this particular young scholars and researchers are located. About 3 weeks ago, I visited one of the universities in another African country in Uganda, and I was pleasantly surprised. We were actually exploring some opportunities for collaboration to host one of the international conferences on the continent, which is an initiative of the university which I belong to. And on my arrival there, I wanted to meet the Dean of Education, and I was pleasantly surprised when I opened the door to find that one of the Dean of the Faculty of Education at that institution was a former ANI member who was also, actually it's not the former, but is current ANI member, but was one of the founding members, was at the inaugural conference of ANI. And because of the background where we're coming from, it was easy for us to be able to strike the right chord in terms of how we can work together to advance the work of ANI, not only within ANI, but also within our institutional context, but also using and leveraging the positions of leadership we are finding ourselves in at the moment. What have been the achievements of ANI? The lessons which we've drawn, we have drawn from our 12 to 13 years of experience. We have been able to achieve our objective of conducting high impactful research projects that led to the publications of books. And I want to indicate that one of the first book that was produced by ANI is written Higher Education in Africa, the International Dimension. And this was purely the work of young scholars, some of whom were still busy with their doctoral studies or with their master's studies. And this work was produced in 2008. In 2013, we produced another book, The Internationalization of African Higher Education Towards Achieving the Millennium Development Goals. And this was also a study that was conducted to look at the extent to which Millennium Development Goals have been advanced in the African continent through the international dimension of higher education. Just at the end of last year, we produced another book, Intra-Africa Student Mobility in Higher Education, Strengths, Prospects, and Challenges which has also been produced by young scholars through any who have been interested, who are interested in the international dimension of higher education. What is interesting about this particular book, and especially with it being published in the context of COVID, is the focus of this particular book, especially in terms of a quest to contribute knowledge in terms of student mobility in Africa. We were interested in 3 questions. There is this assumption that students from the South or in Africa always want to go to the North, but this particular study demonstrates that African students also study in other African countries. And we asked 3 questions. Why did they choose the country they were studying in? And why did they choose that particular institution which they were studying in? And what were their experiences in those particular countries and institutions? And an interesting finding of this book is the fact that those international students who were studying in another African country found that there was quality in the institutions they were studying in, and they would also continue to study in those particular countries. And another interesting finding is about it was the fact that after completing their studies, these students wanted to return home to contribute to the development of their countries. This is, contrary to popular research that always suggests that students from the South or from the developing world, when they go to the North, they don't want to go back to their countries and so on. So these are some of the unique opportunities for contribution to knowledge production, which would not have been possible had Annie not been there. We have also consulted for major international organizations such as British Council, NAFIC, that were doing research on the African continent, and we were to go to organization. We have conducted capacity building workshops for young scholars, and we have also established a presence in 4 African regions that became anchors for Aniwa. What actually happens is that when you have an opportunity to conduct research for an agency that is interested in different African on the African continent, rather than send researchers to those regions where research is supposed to be conducted, we source expertise from our members that are located in those particular regions, and the value of that is that they are able to conduct research that anchors from their regional context and their knowledge of the region, the countries, as well as the institutions they are located in. We have signed MOUs with the regional, continental, and international organizations which have a mutual interest, where we share mutual interest in terms of our focus on internationalization of higher education. And as a result of those activities, we have emerged as a recognized voice for internationalization of higher education on the African continent. I'm going to conclude with the challenges and the lessons which we had during this period. The major challenge which we have had, because we are not drawing from institutions in terms of membership, we are drawing from individuals. It has been a challenge, especially in terms of the support of the viability and sustainability of the institution when you depend on members who sometimes are not endowed with resources. Secondly, we have had challenges of resources and funding because we are a self-financing and self-funding and self-financing institution. So we have had some limitations in terms of the extent to which we can take on some of these big projects without external, funding. So those are some of the interests. Those are some of the findings and the experiences which we have had, and the lessons and the challenges which we have experienced as Ani over the last decade or so. I want to, as you are launching this new organization, I think one advice and input which I would like to contribute to put on the table is for the Indian Association to think about having a similar kind of association. The value of the model which Ani followed is the fact that it gives, an opportunity to young scholars, to new voices. It is not dependent on people who are already established in their field, such as vice chancellors or deputy vice chancellors and so on. And I have found it very rewarding. And I've also found it very helpful to me in terms of my career and building my career profile. And many of the people, as I said, some of them are already in positions of influence at the moment. I thank you very much. And I wish this new organization which you are establishing the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chika. And you actually mentioned so well that the focus of Ani is on research, capacity building, and knowledge production. And you very well articulated even the challenges. And I don't understand why you are not shifting to an institutional membership than an individual membership. Probably the association will be more sustainable if you do so. Nevertheless, there was a great learning. I would also like to inform you that we have recently set up under our university, the Symbiosis Center for Research and International Higher Education, and I will personally connect with you for the same. So we've had excellent, contributions by each member, and there have been a lot of questions in the chat box and personally to me. So I will just take a few questions, at least one question per speaker. Let me first move on to Esther Brimmer. There's a question to you. The question says that you spoke of Nafsa studying trends in higher education and internationalization of higher education. Which are some new trends that are noticed? And are these troubling trends or they are positive? They're positive trends. So would you like to take this question?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for the question. Some of the trends that we're seeing are, especially in light the intersection of sort of longer term trends with internationalization and the response to the pandemic, which obviously has had impacts on so many different aspects of our societies. One of the things we've seen is that that many of us have different specialties. For example, we've talked about our knowledge communities, whether it's working on education abroad, whether it's working on scholarship, on research and scholarship. And we found that people have had to take on new responsibilities, have had to expand beyond their area of expertise because, as you saw, let's say the reduction in the number of people in international offices, that people were having to stretch into other areas. And therefore, one of the roles that associations played, and we found where people were coming to Nafsa, was saying, I have new responsibilities. I now have to lead an expanded office within my institution. Our office, I now am being asked, often by the vice chancellor, by the provost, to take on these new responsibilities. Help me understand these other aspects of our international work that maybe didn't fall in my purview. So it's one of this is having to expand the work you're doing, having to take on and learn quickly new expertise, because that's what we found. People were coming to us saying, okay, help me get smart on this other area. And so some of that may persist, but this need to to expand beyond our usual area of specialty, we're finding is one thing that we think that will continue. Another though is I do think, and this is probably on the negative side, and again this may be particularly in the U.S. context, but I share it with you as an example, that we also have to remake the case for internationalization. That in some institutions, again, faced with the many challenges and pressures of coming out of the pandemic, that for some institutions, their first reaction may have been to pull back, to say, we're concerned about sending students abroad. We're concerned about the ability of our faculty to travel. And so having to remake the case and say, that you want to keep in mind the longer term benefits of international connections despite short-term challenges to help make sure that we retain the longer view. And so those are just two areas we've noticed in, I say, in recently that I would like to share with the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. I move on to Laura. There's a question for you. So Laura, you mentioned that geographical, political, and cultural dimensions influence the way associations work. You also mentioned the importance of shared values and the way we do things. How do very diverse regions with very diverse higher education institutions like India, Africa, and other countries in Asia manage this?
Oh, that's a very excellent question. And I'm not sure I alone could answer it or should answer it. But I think we face this in the context of the EAE very, very clearly. In fact, one of the challenges that we have faced as an association is the extent to which we can actually advocate. And what do we advocate for? So when I think about, for example, the context in which Nafsa works, there is a clear national environment in which advocacy can take place in a particular kind of way because it's all under one national umbrella. But in a regional context, for the EAE, we have members that are living and working in many different countries where the policy priorities may differ, et cetera. And so advocacy can be tricky in that way. What I think we try to do, the best that we can offer under that sort of complex set of circumstances, is to provide opportunities for our members to come together and try to learn from one another about the ways that they may be undertaking, for example, advocacy work within their own national contexts. How is that work being organized? How are some of the messages being packaged and delivered? So there's still mutual learning that can occur across a very diverse landscape. But I think we need to be realistic about what the outputs of that can be. It may not be that we can all agree on a particular thing that we're going to advocate for, but we're going to learn from one another about how effective advocacy can work. What are some of the strategies? What are some of the ways that this has played out? So I think that's, kind of the pragmatic answer there is that by offering safe spaces, high quality frameworks for conversations about shared interests that may not be exactly the same everywhere, but have connections somehow, we can offer really relevant opportunities to have conversations across very real cultural differences or very real political differences. So I think that's the best way that I think I can answer that question.
Thank you. The next question is to Dr. Pankaj, and you mentioned about the national education policy and the way it has encouraged internationalization. And for many, internationalization also means student mobility. With the pandemic now almost having gone and travel opened out, is the Indian government or is AIU going to advocate any kind of scholarships for Indian students to be mobile globally? Because generally you see Indian students who are mobile are the ones who can afford this mobility. But there is a great talent and a hidden great talent across India that doesn't have the opportunity. So through this NEP, this is a question that has come from a foreign participant. So is your government really looking at providing scholarships for a global mobility?
India, as I told you, that we have very few international students in India, and many of them are going abroad. I mean, the ratio is something like 1:20. So to attract foreign students into India, we have many scholarships. We have something like 4,000 scholarships with the ICCR, Indian Council for Cultural Relations. We have many scholarships with a program called Study in India program, in which we are giving scholarships to the foreign students to come and study in India. And there are many scholarships for Indian students to study and go to study abroad. But the numbers in comparison to the ones which we are giving for bringing students to India is less. So therefore, because already so many students are going abroad from the country to the foreign universities, but what we are wanting is that foreign students should come to India. So for that, many scholarships are being instituted. They are already there. But nevertheless, if an Indian student wants to go abroad, and if he is really meritorious, there are scholarships. I cannot speak on behalf of the government whether many more schemes are there or not. But yes, we are encouraging students to go abroad and learn more and more. And whatever skills they want to acquire, they should acquire. But our prime focus is on bringing students to India from foreign countries, for which a number of scholarships are there.
Yes, and just to add to what Pankaj said is that though there could be many scholarships that are offered by the government for Indian students to go abroad, there are universities that do offer, scholarships for semester abroad or twinning programs. So, which means Indian universities do give exposure to Indian students to move, outside India to get the experience of a foreign university.
Yes. Now more and more universities are coming up with joint degrees and twinning programs, and one semester here, and then dual degrees also. So that is happening in more, and especially in the private universities, it is happening, and they are encouraging. But from the government side, more scholarships are for bringing students to India.
Right. So Raman, Professor Raman, there is a question for you. You mentioned that finding equality between collaborating higher education institutions is almost impossible. An equal framework or level playing field for collaborations to work and be sustainable is also very difficult. Then what is the solution, and can interregional cooperation help bridge this gap?
I think the answer must be a modest answer. International cooperation will not in itself create equality. Equality and even inclusiveness in international relations is very difficult to achieve. I think Dr. Brimmer would explain it much better than I would for his practical experience. She was there in a leading position. So we must be, and I like the sentence, which is mine, ambitiously modest. We must know that we cannot solve a lot of problems. We must be strategic and intelligent in choosing issues that can be usefully tackled at the level of international relations. We cannot make small universities in India or in any other country of the world able to discuss in an equal plan with Cambridge, Oxford, or the University of California and its campuses. But if we are strategic, we can find useful ways. For example, in order to discuss how to transform the reaction to the pandemic into a springboard for the future, this can be tackled internationally. In order to discuss that we cannot consider that there is a bi-univocal relation between teaching and learning, or learning and teaching, and that we must accept that most of our learning doesn't come from teaching and continues to come essentially by studying on our own. And that we have to accept that in all universities in the world, in all of them, there are bad teachers whose teaching doesn't lead to any learning, or worst, discourages people from learning, or becomes indoctrination. This can be done. And in order to preach international collaboration using online teaching, in order to get good teachers to teach learners which are not in their university, but in all universities in the world, And in order to allow learners to find good teaching outside the university, all this can be done. We cannot discuss at international level issues like public and private universities. These are extremely sensitive issues in all countries, and each country has found its solution or not solution to this issue. But in other areas, yes, we can discuss. We can, and as we are here talking, some in good English and myself in bad English, we can discuss at international level multilingualism. Laura Rumley is multilingual. She studied in Spain. So I'm sure that his Spanish with Andalusian accent is much better than my Spanish with Catalan accent. But this is an issue that we have to approach. We must meaningfully discuss that we cannot go on transforming bad English in the only language of globalization, because this is what is becoming. If we all talk about policy issues in a bad language, we will end with bad thoughts. So these are a few examples that we must choose. And of course, this is probably, and that will be my last word to your question, Vidya, is we must try to use interregional cooperation in higher education to define an agenda. Probably the first research and policy issue is define an agenda for international cooperation, an agenda that will not cover all issues of international cooperation, but will meaningfully and usefully cover some. And this is my answer when people ask me, and well, international cooperation, interregional cooperation for what? My answer is for the definition of an agenda. This is the first answer.
Thank you, Professor Raman. As always, you give us some food for thought that we can actually brainstorm later. Professor Chia, there is a question to you. We are now discussing inter-regional cooperation, and Africa being a large region. Have you ever thought of intra-regional cooperation, something like what an Erasmus is between the various European countries with a very smooth student mobility? Is there anything like this which the African region has looked at to create an intra-regional cooperation?
Yeah, there are some organizations that organize higher education regionally. As I said, there is Inter-University Council of East Africa that organize universities, on the East African country, and we've got the Southern African Regional University Association, SARUA, that organize universities in Southern Africa, and those particular organizations, they do help in terms of bringing about cohesion in the organization of these universities in those regions. In our case, because we are a membership-based, organization, the nature of our existence lends itself to regional cooperation because our members are found in all these regions of the African continent. They come and participate in our organization in their individual capacity, but drawing, and based in the regions where they are located. And we have found that very much valuable in the sense that, as I said earlier on in my input, that helps us in terms of being able to draw expertise whenever there is a need for work to be done. We find that we know whom to draw upon in different national context and regional context of the African continent.
So one question that has come in the chat box, and it's not really addressed to anybody, and whoever wants to take this. Global partnerships and associations in international education demand an innovative climate. But such an undertaking is not without risk challenges. What are the plausible risks that are associated with the networks, and what role can be played by the international organizations to lower down these risks? Maybe Esther, you want to take this because yours is one of the oldest and maybe you've gone through some kind of risks and challenges. Nafsa?
Thank you. That's a complicated question, so there are probably many different pieces to that. One is to say that there may be that we may have to differentiate just between how our associations are structured in terms of the challenges they face. So, for example, several of our associations are associations of institutions. Some of our associations are associations of members. So the Africa Association and Nafsa are actually individual memberships. And so one of the things is making sure that our individuals, as I say, are able to continue being active even as they change their careers. And so that's one of the things is making sure that we are able to be involved them and they with us throughout their whole careers. One of the reasons we created a group membership was to try to then allow people to band together to be able to sustain their membership over time. So one of the things I think that the associations face is sometimes the challenge is just how they're structured and the needs of their different their different structures. The other challenge I alluded to before was that at times some institutions have sometimes looked at their international cooperation as secondary to their domestic. And I think one of the challenges is saying that no, that you need to continue your international engagements over time. That again, the challenge of short-term financial or concerns sometimes impedes cooperation, and being able to say that you want to sustain it even through challenging times. That we sometimes have seen a challenge at different times, especially in the past 2 years.
Oh, okay, thank you. Pankaj, here is a question to you. We spoke about scholarships for Indian students to move outside. The question is that how do you attract more foreign faculty other than the GYAN scheme? Maybe you could talk about that, and Fulbright scholars that come to India. Is there anything that we as a network can advocate to bring in more foreign faculty? Because we know that when foreign faculty comes into Indian classrooms, obviously the staff rooms change, the culture of our staff room change because they bring in a lot of research and faculty also get benefited by the presence of foreign faculty. So any thoughts on this?
So I agree that foreign faculty is important, and some of our universities are having, for example, Jindal is having many foreign faculty within the university campus. And looking at this, that our rankings, in the world rankings, Indian universities are not there, at least in top 100. There are only 3 in top 200. The government of India felt that there is a need to have more universities in top 100 for which international faculty as well as international students are important. Therefore, when they built in a scheme called Institution of Eminence, in which 10 private and 10 government universities were identified with enhanced funding and enhanced autonomy to them, it was also indicated that at least 15% of the faculty in these institutions can be a foreign faculty, and 20% of the students in these universities can be foreign students. So therefore, that was sort of opening the way for international faculty on Indian campuses. So far, there was a difficulty, especially engaging a full-time faculty, foreign faculty in the Indian universities, especially the government universities. But now that way is open, and at least IOEs can straight away go in for foreign faculty on their campuses, and that will certainly add to the diversity of the campus. That will create an ecosystem on the campus, which will help in the internationalization as well as in improving the rankings. So therefore, as you mentioned, GYAN, which was a global initiative for academic network, in which the government of India was fully paying to a foreign faculty to come and teach in Indian universities for 1 week, 2 weeks, a 1 credit course or something for research collaborations. So that GYAN Plus is also there. And I think many faculty members will come through GYAN to Indian universities, and otherwise also many of the universities will have it once the doors are open for the international faculty in the Indian universities.
Thank you so much. And I think we're coming to the end of this wonderful session. And to sum up, I think it's a great beginning. It was like a curtain raiser to the event tomorrow and the day after. We've all spoken a lot about the importance of networks. A new network has been launched formally. Pankaj, I can take this, this platform to say this, that, we've launched this Indian Network for International Higher Education on this global platform with our other networks. There has been so much learning for each one of us individually and, of course, as institutions. And I'm sure networks which have spoken today, both in Europe, Africa, and as well as, of course, the Nafsa in the US, would also learn so much from our Indian network. I think it's all about being connected with each other, not just to advocate policies in our own countries, but also advocate policies that will, help in becoming a common platform for so many things that are common amongst us. And today, in today's discussions, many of you were echoing the same challenges, as what we would have echoed here in India. Of course, we could not take many more networks that were also interested in joining this session. But I think, Pankaj, we should have a great platform for the networks to come, and be members of our Indian network. And I think there will be more dialogue and more conversations that will happen, which will, of course, eventually benefit not just the Indian higher education system, but higher education system all across the world. So whether it is a global south, whether you define it as a global south or region, the global south, or whether you define south-south-north cooperation, finally it is for the betterment of students and faculty across the world. So with these words, I thank all of you for being here and participating in this roundtable discussion on networks. And I hand over the mic to Anita.
Thank you, Dr. Vidya, and thank you for scintillating and very insightful session. I'd like to thank the participants also who've been sending wonderful, wonderful questions. Thank you so much for joining us for this pre-conference roundtable. Thank you once again, Dr. Vidya and the esteemed panel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.